Hello everyone. I hope you enjoy listening to the story. My name is Amelia Carter, and I was declared mentally unstable by my own husband and voted out of my home by the entire neighborhood. What they did not know, I owned every single house in that HOA. I am standing on the front lawn barefoot on cold concrete, staring at a door that no longer opens for me. The lock has been changed. My suitcase sits beside me like evidence of a life erased overnight. A uniformed officer watches me with polite distance, while 3 members of the HOA board stand behind him, arms crossed, eyes avoiding mine. And then there is my husband, Daniel, standing just behind them with that same calm expression he uses when closing a deal. As if I am nothing more than paperwork he has already filed away. He hands me a document, without stepping closer. Emergency removal for mental instability. My name printed cleanly at the top. My hands tremble, but I do not let the paper fall. The worst part is not the accusation. It is the woman standing beside him, Linda, the HOA president, the one who smiles at me during neighborhood barbecues. Now watching me like I am a problem finally solved. And yes, she is the one sleeping with my husband. Let that sink in. I used to host dinners for these people. I remembered birthdays, organized holiday lights, donated to every community fund they pushed into my mailbox. I built a life here brick by brick, smile by smile. Now I hear whispers drift through half-opened windows. Unstable, dangerous, liability. Words that feel rehearsed, like lines from a script I never agreed to perform in. I should be screaming. I should be begging. Instead, I go very still. My heart pounds so hard it feels like it might split my ribs open, but my face stays calm. Because something about this feels wrong in a way that is too clean, too organized. Daniel has always been persuasive, but this is precise. Planned. Manufactured. I remember the small things now. The broken glass he claimed I threw. The late-night arguments that somehow got recorded. The neighbors who stopped making eye contact weeks ago. I should have seen the pattern forming, but I trusted him. That was my first mistake. I looked down at the document again, scanning the language, the clauses, the authority cited. And then I see it. A detail, so small they assumed I would never question it. I almost laugh. Instead, I fold the paper slowly and slip it into my bag. Daniel mistakes my silence for defeat. Linda tilts her head with that soft, fake sympathy. They think they have already won. But I am not leaving because I have no choice. I am leaving because I finally understand the game. And they have no idea who actually owns the board they just used to destroy me. So tell me, if your entire community turned against you in a single night, would you walk away quietly? Or would you come back and burn the system down from the inside? I met Daniel 10 years ago at a charity event where he knew exactly what to say and when to say it. He had that effortless charm that made people lean in, trust him, believe him without question. I remember thinking I was lucky. I was the one with structure, with discipline, with a stable career in financial planning, and he was the one who could light up a room. We balanced each other, or at least that is what I told myself for years. When we moved into this neighborhood, I did everything I could to make it a home, not just for us, but for everyone around us. I joined committees, helped organize events, reviewed budgets for the HOA when they needed a second pair of eyes. People trusted me. They relied on me. I was not just a resident. I was part of the system that kept this place running smoothly. That is why what happened next did not unfold overnight, even though it felt like it did. It started with small cracks. Things I brushed off because I believed in my marriage more than I believed in my instincts. Daniel began staying out later, claiming work dinners, networking, the usual excuses that sound reasonable until you hear them too often. Then came the subtle shifts in how he spoke to me, gentle corrections that felt like concern but carried a sharp edge underneath. He would say I was overreacting, that I was imagining things, that I needed to relax. The first time he said I might be under too much stress, I laughed it off. The 10th time, I started to question myself. That was the beginning. At the same time, Linda began inserting herself into our lives more frequently. As HOA president, she had every excuse to be around, reviewing policies, discussing upcoming votes, stopping by with updates that could have easily been sent by email. She praised Daniel often, called him reliable, level-headed, exactly the kind of man the community needed more of. When she looked at me, it was different. Softer on the surface, but calculating underneath, like she was measuring something invisible. I ignored it, because confronting it would mean admitting something I was not ready to face. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to feel different. Conversations would stop when I approached. Invitations became less frequent. Smiles turned into polite nods. I told myself people were busy, that I was reading too much into it, but deep down I felt the shift. It was subtle, coordinated, and I did not yet understand why. Then came the incidents. A glass shattering in the kitchen after an argument that Daniel later described to others as me losing control. A late-night disagreement where he stayed calm while I raised my voice, only to later replay a recording that captured just my frustration without context. Each moment was isolated, easy to dismiss on its own. But together they formed a narrative that I did not realize was being built around me. I started noticing small things that made no sense at the time. My medication bottle moved from where I always kept it, items misplaced, then found in odd locations. Once, I could have sworn I left the front door locked, only to find it slightly open in the morning. Daniel would respond with concern, asking if I was getting enough rest, suggesting maybe I needed to talk to someone. He said it gently, convincingly, and I wanted to believe him. That was my second mistake. The turning point came when I realized I was no longer being included in decisions that affected my own home. HOA emails that I used to receive stopped arriving. Meeting notes were shared with Daniel instead of me. When I asked about it, he said he was just trying to handle things, so I would not feel overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. That word followed me everywhere. It appeared in conversations, in passing comments from neighbors. Even in the way Linda addressed me during one brief interaction, her tone careful, almost patronizing. I should have seen it then, the coordinated effort, the alignment of language, the quiet agreement forming behind closed doors. But I was still trying to save a marriage that had already been weaponized against me. The night of the vote, I was not invited. I found out later that it was labeled an emergency session, justified by concerns about my behavior. Daniel spoke first, I am told. He expressed worry, said he loved me, said he just wanted me to get help. Linda followed, emphasizing the need to protect the community, to act quickly before something unpredictable happened. They presented selected evidence, carefully edited, stripped of context. No one questioned it. Why would they? They trusted the system. And the system was being controlled by people they believed were acting in their best interest. The vote passed unanimously. Not one person asked to hear my side. Not one person knocked on my door that night to check if I was even aware of what was happening. By the time I realized something was wrong, it was already done. Standing outside my locked house, listening to Daniel tell me this was legal, that I had no ground to stand on, something inside me shifted. The fear did not disappear, but it changed shape. It became sharp, focused. I stopped trying to defend myself in that moment because I understood that the battle they wanted was emotional, chaotic, easy to dismiss. I was not going to give them that. Instead, I took a breath, pulled out my phone, and stepped away from the crowd. I called my lawyer, someone I had not spoken to in months, and when he answered, I did not explain everything. I asked one question, clear and precise. Who legally owns the HOA governing this community? There was a pause on the line. A brief silence that felt heavier than anything I had experienced that night. Then he said he would check immediately. I waited, watching Daniel from a distance as he spoke quietly with Linda. Their heads close together, their expressions relaxed, confident. They believed the process had protected them. They believed the system was on their side. But as I stood there, suitcase at my feet, phone pressed to my ear, I felt something else entirely. Not defeat. Not confusion. Clarity. Because if there was one thing I understood better than anything else, it was ownership. And if they had made a mistake there, even a small one, then everything they had just done could collapse under its own weight. My lawyer called me back in less than 10 minutes, and that alone told me everything I needed to know. His voice was not confused or cautious. It was sharp, alert, the kind of tone he only used when something was very wrong or very valuable. He said the HOA was not what it appeared to be. On the surface, it was just another suburban governing body, managed by a rotating board, funded by residents, controlled by votes. But beneath that layer, there was a holding structure. A corporate entity that technically owned the land rights, the shared assets, and the enforcement authority of every rule those people believed protected them. And when he said the name of that entity, I had to close my eyes for a second because I already knew what he was about to confirm. I was the majority owner. Not partially. Not indirectly. Completely and decisively in control. 5 years ago, when the original developers began to struggle with debt, I saw an opportunity. I was not trying to take over a neighborhood. I was protecting an investment. I quietly acquired portions of their debt through a series of legal channels. Structured acquisitions through shell companies that I personally controlled and consolidated those holdings into one entity. It was clean, legal, and invisible to anyone not looking closely. The residents never noticed because nothing changed on the surface. The board still operated. The rules still applied. Life continued exactly as before. That was the point. I never intended to interfere. I just wanted control if I ever needed it. I never imagined I would need it against my own husband. Daniel never asked questions about my financial activities. He liked the benefits, the lifestyle, the stability, but he never cared about the details. That was his third mistake. He assumed I was passive because I was quiet about money. He assumed control belonged to whoever spoke the loudest in the room. Linda made the same assumption. They both believed the HOA board was the highest authority because it was the only authority they could see. But the board was nothing more than a layer, a performance, and I owned the stage beneath it. When my lawyer finished explaining the structure, I asked him one thing. Could the board legally remove me under the current circumstances? He paused, then answered with precision. Only if the process was valid, unbiased, and free of conflict of interest. I almost smiled when he said that, because I already knew it was not. Over the next 48 hours, I did not rush back to confront them. I did not demand access to my house or call the police to force entry. That would have been emotional, reactive. Exactly what they expected from someone they had labeled unstable. Instead, I moved quietly. I reviewed every document tied to the HOA, every clause, every procedural requirement. I pulled records of the emergency meeting, the voting structure, the attendance list. It did not take long to find the cracks. Linda had not disclosed her personal relationship with Daniel. That alone was a direct violation of conflict of interest rules. The vote had been pushed through without proper notice, justified under an emergency clause that required immediate and verifiable risk. They had no such proof. The evidence they presented was selectively edited, lacking full context, and in some cases, misleading by omission. Legally, it was fragile. Structurally, it was flawed. And strategically, it was exactly what I needed. I could have ended it there. I could have invalidated the vote, dissolved the board, and walked back into my house within a day. But that would not have been enough. They did not just try to remove me. They rewrote who I was in front of an entire community. They turned trust into suspicion and isolation into justification. I wanted more than reversal. I wanted exposure. So I started building my case the way I build any financial strategy. Step by step, detail by detail, without revealing the endgame too early. I gathered communication logs between Linda and Daniel. I documented timeline inconsistencies. I secured copies of the recordings they used, then traced how they were edited. Every piece added weight. Every detail sharpened the picture. And the more I uncovered, the clearer their mistake became. They had assumed speed would protect them. that acting quickly would prevent scrutiny. But speed only works when no one stops to examine the structure behind it. And I had already stepped outside of their narrative. 3 days later, the neighborhood hosted a gathering. A casual event organized by the board to reinforce unity after what they described as a difficult but necessary decision. I saw the announcement online and knew immediately this was the moment they felt safest. Public setting. Controlled narrative.
Supportive audience.
They were celebrating stability, congratulating themselves for handling a problem before it escalated. I decided to attend, not as a resident, but as an observer. I stood at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed at first, watching Daniel laugh with neighbors, watching Linda accept quiet praise for her leadership. No one looked uncomfortable. No one questioned anything. It was almost impressive how quickly they had normalized what happened. That is when I understood something important. People do not resist a lie if it protects their sense of order. They accept it, repeat it, and build around it. Later that evening, I sent a formal request to the board. A simple appeal for review. Calm language. No accusations. Just a request to revisit the decision under proper procedural guidelines. I knew they would accept. Not because they respected the process, but because they believed I was defeated. They expected me to come back asking for sympathy, maybe negotiation, maybe compromise. They thought I was trying to regain access to my home. What they did not understand was that I was not asking for anything. I was giving them one more chance to stand in front of everyone and defend what they had done. And this time, I would be standing there too, not as the woman they pushed out, but as the person who owned the system they relied on to do it. The meeting room is packed in a way I have never seen before, every chair filled. Every corner lined with people pretending this is just another routine HOA discussion. The air feels heavier than usual, thick with quiet curiosity and the kind of tension that builds when people expect something uncomfortable but cannot quite name it. I step inside without rushing, heels steady against the polished floor, posture straight, expression neutral. Conversations soften as heads turn. Some recognize me immediately. Others take a second longer, their eyes narrowing as if trying to reconcile the version of me they were told with the person now standing in front of them. Daniel is already seated at the front beside Linda, both of them composed, confident, completely unaware of how fragile that confidence really is. He leans back slightly when he sees me, a faint smile touching his lips. The kind that says he believes this moment belongs to him. Linda gestures toward an empty chair with controlled politeness. Her voice smooth as she invites me to present my appeal. She thinks this is a formality. She thinks I am here to ask for permission to exist in a space I already own. I do not sit. I place my folder on the table, fingers resting lightly on top of it, and take a slow breath before speaking. My voice does not shake. It carries cleanly across the room, calm and measured in a way that forces people to listen more closely. I begin by thanking the board for their time, acknowledging the seriousness of the concerns raised about me, repeating their language back to them with quiet precision. I watch their expressions as I do it. Relief, at first. Validation. They think I am accepting their version of events. Then I shift. I ask them to walk through the process of the emergency vote step by step, not challenging, just clarifying. Linda answers confidently, outlining the procedure, emphasizing the urgency, the need to protect the community. Daniel nods along, reinforcing her statements with small additions that paint him as the concerned husband trying to do the right thing. It is almost convincing. Almost. When they finish, I open the folder and slide a single document across the table. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough to redirect attention. Linda glances down at it, then back at me, irritation flickering beneath her composure. I ask her to read the highlighted section aloud. She hesitates for half a second, then complies, her voice steady at first, then tightening as she reaches the clause regarding conflict of interest. The room grows quieter. I do not interrupt. I let the silence stretch just long enough for people to begin connecting the dots on their own. Then I speak again, still calm, still controlled. And I explain that the relationship between her and Daniel was never disclosed, making the entire vote legally compromised. A ripple moves through the crowd. Someone shifts in their seat. Someone else whispers. Daniel straightens, the first hint of tension appearing in his posture. But he tries to recover quickly, dismissing it as irrelevant, as personal, as something that does not affect the outcome. That is when I place the second document on the table. This one outlines the procedural violations: lack of proper notice, insufficient evidence, misuse of emergency authority. I do not raise my voice. I do not accuse. I simply read the facts, one after another, letting each one land with its own weight. Linda interrupts, trying to regain control, but the certainty in her tone is gone now, replaced by something sharper, defensive. Daniel looks at her, then at me, calculating, trying to understand where this is going. They both still think this is about reversing the decision. They still think the worst outcome is that I move back into my house. They have not realized what is coming next. I close the folder gently and rest my hands on the table, leaning forward just enough to hold the room's attention. I think we all agree, I say, that the integrity of this community depends on the integrity of its governance. The phrasing is deliberate, familiar, echoing the very principles they claim to uphold. Heads nod slowly. Even Linda nods, out of habit more than agreement. That is when I take the final document from my bag and place it in front of them. This time, I do not ask her to read it. I speak first. The HOA board does not actually own the authority it exercises. The sentence lands like a dropped glass. Confusion spreads across faces. Daniel frowns, leaning forward, trying to follow. Linda's eyes narrow as she scans the document, her expression shifting from irritation to disbelief. I continue before either of them can interrupt. The governing rights of this community are held by a parent entity, a holding company that owns the land, the assets, and the legal framework that gives this board its power. I let the pause stretch just long enough for anticipation to build, then I finish the sentence. And I am the majority owner of that company. The room falls completely silent. Not the polite silence from before, but something deeper, heavier, like the air has been pulled out entirely. Daniel's face drains of color in a way I have never seen before. Linda stops breathing for a moment, her hand frozen on the edge of the paper. Someone in the back lets out a quiet, involuntary sound, half gasp, half disbelief. I do not smile. I do not need to. I simply stand there and let the reality settle in. Daniel is the first to react, pushing back his chair, his voice rising as he demands clarification, denial wrapped in anger. He calls it impossible, accuses me of manipulation, tries to reassert control through volume. It does not work. The foundation he is standing on has already shifted. I respond the same way I have handled everything else that day, calmly, precisely, without emotion. I explain the ownership structure, the acquisitions, the legal authority that comes with it. I outline what that authority allows me to do: dissolve the board, void the vote, initiate legal action for fraud, defamation, and abuse of power. Each word lands heavier than the last. Linda tries to interrupt, but her voice cracks, betraying her. She looks around the room for support, but the room has already moved away from her. People are no longer looking at me as the problem. They are looking at her as the liability. I take one final step forward, closing the distance just enough to make it clear this is not a discussion anymore. Effective immediately, I say, this board is dissolved. The sentence is quiet, but it carries more weight than anything shouted in that room. The vote against me is void. The eviction is illegal. And as of this moment, I am initiating formal legal proceedings against both of you. I do not raise my voice when I say their names. I do not need to. Security, already notified, steps closer to the entrance, their presence subtle but unmistakable. Daniel's anger collapses into something else now, something smaller, more desperate. Linda looks like she might fall out of her chair. They tried to remove me from my home. I continue, my voice steady, unbroken. So, I am removing them from every position of power they thought they controlled. This time, I do not pause for effect. I turn, gather my documents, and walk toward the door without looking back. Behind me, the room erupts into overlapping voices, questions, confusion, the sound of a narrative collapsing in real time. I do not need to stay to watch it finish. I already know how it ends. The house feels different when I walk back in, not because anything has changed physically, but because everything false has been stripped away. The same walls, the same furniture, the same quiet hum of a place that used to feel like safety now feels like something else entirely. Ownership, control, truth. I set my bag down slowly, letting the silence settle around me, and for the first time in days, I allow myself to breathe without tension tightening my chest. Outside, the neighborhood continues as if nothing happened, but I know better. Nothing here is the same anymore. Daniel does not come back that night. I hear later that he tries to contact me through calls and messages, each one more desperate than the last, but I do not answer. I have nothing left to say to him. Whatever existed between us ended the moment he decided to turn my life into evidence against me. Linda's situation unfolds even faster. Within 48 hours, she is removed from her position, her reputation unraveling in the same circles that once praised her leadership. People who stood beside her now distance themselves quietly, as if proximity alone might implicate them. It is almost predictable how quickly loyalty shifts when power changes hands. The legal process moves forward with precision. My lawyer handles everything efficiently, filing claims that are supported not just by emotion, but by documentation so detailed it leaves no room for interpretation. Fraud, defamation, abuse of authority. Each charge is backed by evidence they never thought anyone would examine closely. Daniel's financial standing begins to collapse under the weight of it, accounts frozen, partnerships withdrawn, his carefully maintained image dissolving piece by piece. Linda faces her own consequences, barred from holding any position of governance within the community and beyond. Her name now associated with a breach of trust that cannot be easily repaired. The neighborhood responds in quieter ways. Some people avoid me entirely, unwilling to confront what they allowed to happen. Others offer apologies that feel more like attempts to ease their own conscience than genuine remorse. I accept none of them. Not out of anger, but because accountability is not something that can be undone with a few words. I do not feel triumphant. That is what surprises me the most. There is no rush of satisfaction, no sense of victory the way people imagine when justice is served. Instead, there is clarity. A steady, grounded understanding of what happened and why. Power does not announce itself. It does not need to. It exists quietly until someone tries to use it against you without realizing who actually holds it. I trusted too easily. I allowed proximity to blur judgment. That was my mistake, and I own it fully. But I also understand now that survival in a system like this requires more than trust. It requires awareness, structure, and the willingness to act when lines are crossed. They called me unstable because it made their actions easier to justify. In reality, the only unstable thing in this entire situation was the system they tried to manipulate without understanding its foundation. I stand by the window, looking out at the same streets where people once smiled at me without hesitation. And I wonder how many of them truly believed the story they were told. Maybe it does not matter anymore. What matters is that the truth does not need approval to exist. It stands on its own, whether people choose to face it or not. So tell me if you had been in my place. Watching everything you built get taken from you in a single night, would you have stopped at reclaiming what was yours? Or would you have done exactly what I did and made sure no one could ever use that system against you again? In the end, the real lesson was never about revenge. It was about truth and control. I learned that silence can be dangerous when it protects dishonesty. And trust without awareness can become a weapon in someone else's hands. People will often choose the easiest version of a story, especially when it keeps their world comfortable. But integrity does not bend to convenience. If something feels wrong, it probably is, and ignoring it only gives others the space to rewrite your reality. Stay aware, protect what you build, and never let anyone define your story without facts to back it up. If this story made you think, or if you believe more people need to hear lessons like this, take a second to subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know, would you have handled it differently?